Welcome. You have reached review time with Imperial, and today's review will be Venom 2, Let There Be Carnage. Let's get into it. So, let's get over the cast. Of course, you have Woody Harrelson plays as Cletus, Cassidy, also Carnage, Tom Hardy as Brock, also as Venom. Naomi Harris as Streak. Also, you had Stephen Graham as Mulligan, Peggy Lou as Miss Chen, Reed Scott as Dan Lewis, and Michelle Williams as Anne. Let's get into it. So this movie was not long. This movie was actually a short movie, especially for a Marvel movie. An hour and 30 minutes, but it was only an hour and 30 minutes, but it got straight to the point, and it was enough for an hour and 30 minutes. It was action-packed. It picks up right off of the last Venom, where Brock is meeting with Cletus Cassidy. Cletus Cassidy was a serial killer, killed a bunch of different people, and they pretty much don't know where all the bodies is at. So Brock goes in, interviews him, and when he interviews him, he doesn't give him no information, but because Venom is inside of Brock, Venom peeps some stuff walking past Cletus Cassidy's cage. And inside of his cage, his prison cell, he pretty much picked up clues, and Venom was able to discover where all the bodies was buried at. And what that in return did was set the state up to put Cletus on the death row, and they was keeping him alive to hopefully one day he'd tell where the bodies was at. So that pissed him off. Meanwhile, you find out that Cletus had a long lost girlfriend that was kept away in a cell at a remote location, and Detective Mulligan, he was responsible for shooting out her eye. So on Cletus's death, when he get executed, he requests for Brock to come, and for his last words, he sends Brock a postcard with all this writing on it. Brock shows up, and then he starts talking greasy to Brock, and his emotions got the best of him. Now, of course, throughout this whole time, there's back and forth banter between Brock and Venom that, got its little moments or whatever. But Venom comes out and grabs Cletus Cassidy. And when he grabbed him, Cletus went down and bit inside of Brock. And then he instantly said, "I taste a lot of blood in my life," and that was a different type of blood. So instantly, that's how Carnage gets inside of Brock. Gets inside of Cletus Cassidy. Now, of course, it brings out that symbiote brings out the worst in him. So he's already a serial killer naturally. So it's going to enhance everything that's inside him, and he's a red symbiote, so he's even more vicious than what Venom is. And so meanwhile, Brock and Venom, they have a back and forth, and Anne reaches out to Brock. She pretty much want to tell him in person that she's going to get married to the Dr. Dan guy, and Brock is heartbroken because he always think that they were going to get back together. And so him and Venom went back and forth, and basically they split between the two. Now, Venom has been living off of chicken and chocolate or whatever, but he wants to be released to do him. And Brock, he feels like Brock is holding him back, so they split. And Venom was basically jumping into different bodies and surfacing the world. He ended up seeing that a lot of the people he was jumping in, he wasn't a match with them. So he ended up going to a costume party, and they thought he was just in a costume, but he jumped on the mic and pretty much gave his speech about being independent and people need to accept you who you are, and we can live together in harmony or whatever. So meanwhile, all that's going on, Cletus Cassidy is turning into Carnage at his death row execution, and of course he rips Carnage through everybody, kills people, kills the warden, breaks himself out of jail. His mission is to go find his love, and he tapped into the dark world, found out where she was at, then he went to go break her out. Meanwhile, the world is in chaos with Carnage ripping through everybody. So then you have Venom out on his own, and he was dying, so he found his way back to Miss Chen. Now, of course, Miss Chen knows what Venom is, and so he was dying, saying he need food, and so he jumped into Mrs. Chen. Meanwhile, they locked Brock up, and he kind of explained to Ann. He said he wanted to speak to one person. Ann came in. He kind of told her, like, yo, it's somebody else out there, and he thought he remembered what when Cletus bit him, and so that's a whole nother symbiote. So he was like, you gotta find Venom so we can get back together, and we can, so she found Venom. He was in Mrs. Chen, so that was a humorous moment where Venom was in Mrs. Chen, and he was talking through Mrs. Chen, and so he got a soft spot for Ann, and Ann pretty much said, I want to see you in action. I want to see you go after this guy. And so he finally met up with Brock, and it shows where Venom became Ann, and so it's the female version of Venom. So that was like, people was like seeing that in Venom 1. So you seen that again in Venom 2, and they link up with Brock. They had a little back and forth. Brock apologized, and so they wanted the Carnage wanted to kill Venom. Cletus Cassidy wanted to kill Brock, and Street, the girlfriend, she wanted to, played by Naomi Harrison, she wanted to kill the detective. So they all meet up at a church. One last scene of destruction, fighting back and forth. Now, Street, the girlfriend, she had her powers where she could scream real loud. Of course, the symbiote's weakness is loud noise and fire. So she had already used her powers, and Carnage didn't like that because that's his weakness. So he had already told Cletus if she don't shut up, he was going to handle her. So you already showed there was a mismatch between Carnage and Cletus. So while they're fighting, he was ready to kill Street, and Cletus, stopped him. Meanwhile, the detective is tied up. Venom is getting dusted, but then he was able to develop some strength. He was saying he was weak, and then Brock was just letting him know that they're not a pair, but me and you are. So that got him some strength so that he can one last hurrah, and they were able to split Brock and the symbiote away. And then Venom, when the symbiote tried to dip back into Cletus, Venom hurried up and grabbed the Carnage and ate the symbiote. Meanwhile, he bit off Cletus' head, and they knew at this moment everybody would be after Brock, so he pretty much parted his ways. And the detective, you seen where he was tied up, you see he was actually, something was inside of him, so he wasn't normal no more. So a symbiote, something got inside him. So then that's going to be somewhere part 3. Meanwhile, you also seen that Street, a big bell fell on top of her, but it really didn't show that she died. You just feel the big bell fell on top of her, so you figure she did, but she could still be alive too. Meanwhile, Brock and Venom went on the beach, and they were off doing they were off living life on the beach, and he was on the bed talking to Venom, and Venom was saying, basically, it's stuff that you don't know that I have seen all over the world, and if I showed you everything, it'll fry your brain or whatever. And he was like, well, show me. And he said, I'll give you an inkling. But then a big boom happened, and what happened was they tied this into the Marvel series with the Endgame and Thanos and all that. So the snap, and what happens is the snap allowed, and then the snap back that came in, it allowed 5 years to pass. And so the room he was once in, 5 years didn't pass, and he got snapped back. And when he got snapped back, he thought he was in that same room, but it 5 years didn't pass, so somebody else was in that room that he was once in. And Venom antennas went up, and it shows Spider-Man on the screen. And this is fast forward where Spider-Man 3 is great come out, No Way Home, where Venom licked the screen on Spider-Man, say, I don't like this guy, or whatever. And so that was the post-credit scene right there. So when the snap happened, Venom got snapped. When Thanos snapped the first time, Venom got snapped out. And of course, when they snapped him back, Venom snapped back in 5 years later in the same room. And he didn't really know what happened. Meanwhile, 5 years transpired. Of course, you had Spider-Man. Venom and Spider-Man always been rivals. So overall, it was a decent film. Fast, an hour and a half only. But it was action-packed. Got to see how Carnage get down. Out of my 4-star rating system, I'm going to give this movie a 2.5 out of 4 stars. Subscribe to the channel, like the video. Till next time.